Welcome to the Focus on Why podcast. I'm Amy Rowlandson and I ask my guests one simple question. Why? Focusing on the importance of why, I share with you the relatable, uplifting and inspiring conversations I have with people from all walks of life. This podcast will encourage you to focus on your why to enable and empower you to achieve the success you desire. Have a purpose, have a plan, focus on why. Today on the Focus on Why podcast, I am joined by Peter Edge. Peter, a very warm welcome.
Thanks very much.
And why are you here today?
Well, I'm here today, I suppose, to tell you a little bit about myself and how I've got where I've got. Just to start that, I'm now a sometime professional speaker and stand-up comedian, but I wasn't always. And the journey to get to that stage has been an interesting one, you might say. So if I take you right back to where I started from as a school leaver at the ripe old age of 17 and a half, 18, I went to Liverpool University to study dentistry, of all things. I've been sort of channeled that way as a result of my, I suppose, preferred subjects in the sciences. And the school I was at was very much geared to producing professional people. So, you know, if you were doing sciences, the idea was you'd be either a vet, a doctor, or a dentist. And I wasn't clever enough to be either a doctor or a vet, so I went to do dentistry. It helped that my two elder sisters were both dentists as well. So I went studying dentistry at Liverpool. Got to the end of the first year, having had a whale of a time. Back in the days when you used to get a grant to go to university, and having been in a single-sex boys' grammar school, educated by the Irish Christian Brothers, needless to say, the freedoms of university life I found quite attractive. And they competed very successfully with the requirements to study and do exams. So it really came as no surprise that at the end of my first year, I didn't do terribly well. So having failed my exams, I resat them, passed the ones I'd failed, and failed the ones I'd already passed. So myself and dentistry parted. And I went to do what I'd always wanted to do, really, I think, in my heart, which was to become a police officer. And so I went literally straight from what they used to call the progress interview at university. And a friend of mine picked me up in his car. We drove straight to Hope Street Police Station, which was then the headquarters of Merseyside Police. I walked in the front door and said, "I'd like to join the police." And the rest, as they say, is history. So that was in the days, of course, when you could join the police quite young. So I was, 19 and a half when I joined the police in 1981. And it was a hell of a journey. I was pitched in straight away to the Toxteth riots of 1981, which was a real baptism of fire. And I remember thinking during the middle of that, I wish I'd stayed in dentistry. In fact, I always used to walk around. I had a little book in my pocket, and the anatomists would know this book. It's a book by a fellow called Alf Brodal called Cranial Nerves. And so I constantly had this in my tunic pocket, thinking that I might actually go and resit my exams again and go back. But no, I fell in love with policing. Really did. It was, for me, it was a vocation. I felt very much a sense of responsibility and duty to help people, to protect people from those in society who would take advantage of the vulnerable, and there are plenty of them out there. And that's what drove me into it, really. And as I say, I fell in love with it. I did a few years in uniform before I sort of moved into vice, plainclothes, drugs, prostitution, licensing, all the juicy stuff. And then again, more into more specialised drugs investigations in the drug squad before being promoted out, and again going through that cycle of uniform, back into plainclothes, back into the drug squad. And I was flying. I was absolutely flying. I was a bright young thing. In those days, even though I didn't have a degree, I had O-levels and A-levels. So I was considered to be educationally qualified. In fact, that's the expression that the guy at the recruitment office said when I walked into Hope Street. He said, "Oh, just hang on there a minute. The chief inspector will want to speak to you because you're educationally qualified." We have people now with PhDs. I'm not sure when I joined, you had to even be able to read and write. You just had to know someone who could. But having got in and being reasonably well educated, I flew through the ranks. And in about 1996, I was promoted to Detective Chief Inspector, which made me the youngest DCI in Merseyside Police. I had loads of allies. I had loads of people pushing for me. I had loads of people pushing me to higher rank. And at that point, there's a maxim in the police, really, which is that if you're going to reach chief officer level, so assistant chief constable and beyond, you should be a superintendent by the time you're 40. So I was a chief inspector by the time I was 35. That gave me 5 years to become a superintendent if I was going to be on track. And I was doing really well. I was well thought of. Again, I was being given extra work. I was being pushed. And I had some allies in headquarters who would fight my corner and take my paper into the room, if you like, to coin a phrase. And then on the 1st of October 1998, it all went horribly wrong. And I received a phone call from one of my detective superintendents who said, "Peter, I need to interview you." Well, sorry, why? Maybe I don't want to be interviewed. He said, "No, I need to interview you, and it will be under criminal caution." And basically the world fell out. And I went the next day to an interview room in a police station. I mean, it shouldn't perhaps have come as too much of a surprise to me, because this all resulted from my very best friend, the best man at my wedding, the godfather of my eldest daughter, a guy I'd been in partnership with both in the plainclothes and in the drug squad. He'd been arrested about 6 weeks prior to this, and there was a big anti-corruption inquiry going into him. So it was real line of duty stuff. And I suppose because of my closeness to him, my friendship with him, the spotlight fell on me. And so I was interviewed probably for about 8 hours that following day. And at the end of it, I was suspended. And I was suspended from duty for nearly 2.5 years. And that not only knocked like a 10-year hole in my career, but it absolutely turned on its head everything that had driven me into the police, everything I'd experienced. And it had a profound effect on me. It's difficult to articulate how the police works if you've never been in it. But the sense of camaraderie, the sense of sacrifice, the sense of we're all in this together against the bad guys is something that runs through every police officer, I would say. To then all of a sudden have that completely turned on its head, completely through 180 degrees, and all the resources, all the investigative skill, all the determination to prosecute being focused back on yourself, was difficult to say the least, damaging, undoubtedly. And I then had to fight the organisation I'd been part of to clear my name, to try and prove my innocence. Because, throughout all of this, I'm thinking there's a little voice in my head that's saying, what do they think I am? Do they not know me? Has the last 20 years counted for nothing? I'm not a criminal. Why are they giving me a criminal caution? Why are they interviewing me under caution? And when I say, I had to fight the organisation, it really did feel like that. And every request for information, every request for disclosure, every request for access to documents was met with a refusal. No, 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 no. And it crushes you. It absolutely crushes you. And I know now why I was suspended, and what they hoped to achieve. They believed, the force believed, that I had the information that would unlock the prosecution against my best mate. And I didn't. But could I get them to believe that? No. I was subsequently interviewed maybe 5 or 6 different times. I got to the state, and this was, a lot of this was really quite, how to describe it? I think I've used the word sinister before, but it was designed, and these may have been some of the tactics that I'd used myself in previous investigations, but it was designed to put maximum pressure on me, try and force me to cave into that pressure. And if I could have done, I probably would have done, but I didn't have what they wanted. I didn't have the information that they wanted. So, one of the things that springs to mind, there's a point in this where they changed the venue of the interview the night before. So I'd been called to an interview, and they changed the venue the night before to a police station with a custody suite, which is a very subtle way of saying, we're going to arrest you tomorrow. And they left me with 16 hours to dwell on that and to try and think of what my next move was. And again, it's difficult to articulate how much pressure that puts on you. But this was, that sort of pressure was building and was being, in my humble opinion, deliberately applied and increased throughout the period, with a view to me saying, okay, enough's enough. I'm going to spill the beans on my mate Tony. I didn't have the beans to spill, and they couldn't get that. They never ever got that. And I remember, throughout this, and I don't think I ever sought a diagnosis of depression or whatever, but I'm pretty convinced that I was, certainly at some stage. And I say that because, I was probably demonstrating an awful lot of the typical symptoms. So, irritation, lack of sleep, disturbed sleep patterns, over-reliance on alcohol, various other sort of classic symptoms. But also the sort of behavior that I was exhibiting at the time was obsessive. I'd been a detective, so I was, if you like, counter-investigating myself. So it was me, one person, and I had a federation friend, if you like, so a representative from the Police Federation who would support me, and who was a route back into the organisation. But even the Federation were being marginalised at that stage, and I had solicitors. But again, solicitors work quite slowly in some cases, and they're very, very thoughtful and very measured in what they do. But I wanted answers now, and I would come down. I had, box files, 20 box files of evidence, of disclosure, of documents that had been served on me during interviews, all that sort of stuff, and they were spread out around my usual sitting chair in the living room, and they basically never moved really for months and months and months. And my routine would be to come down in the morning in my dressing gown, and I would start, and I would be reading through all of those documents, all about me, many of which, were conversations I'd had that had been recorded on the phone, so that had my phones intercepted for months and months and months. And I'm trying to pick out bits of evidence. I'm trying to pick out points to prove the way that I would vet, for instance, a file for a serious crime, a murder, a robbery, or a rape, or something like that. And so this counter investigation was my life. That was it. So every day, without fail, down, head in the books, head in the papers. And, it would come 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I'd still be there in my dressing gown, having not got dressed or anything like that. And some days, you get a letter from the solicitors saying, no, they've refused another disclosure or they've done this. And it just crushes you, just absolutely crushes you. So, there were days, I can remember days where I'd just literally curled up on the floor and just couldn't move, just absolutely debilitated by the overwhelming pressure of that the organization that I'd loved, the organization that I thought loved me, was now bringing to bear. And, a lot of these people were my friends. There were people I'd joined the job with, people I'd had a pint with, people I'd played rugby with. And they were turning on me. And again, that little voice in the back of my head, what do they think I am? How bad do they think I am, that I would do any of these things that they are now accusing me of? So that went on. For the first 18 months of that period, it was potentially a criminal investigation. 18 months with the threat, basically, of going to prison hanging over me. And I hadn't done anything. I know everyone says that. Oh, I never did nothing. But I honestly, I knew it inside out. I knew what the allegations were inside out. And I also knew what the allegations were against my friend. So after about 18 months, the force wrote to me and said, yeah, the CPS have decided there's no case to answer. Oh, what, really? Thanks very much for that. So that was a weight off. However, we're now going to apply discipline proceedings to you. So again, another near 12 months of discipline interviews, separate disclosure over police discipline code offences, which resulted in a hearing before the chief constable in early 2001, I think it was. It may have been late 2000, I'm not sure. But I returned to work in 2001, having been reduced in rank by 1 rank. So they busted me to inspector. And that was, basically over procedural shortfalls that, strangely enough, would be exposed in most people, I think, if ever they looked. And I think it was almost a justification for what had been done. That's just my view. And I've never really spoken to anyone about it, anyone that was in the investigation team. I was hoping to speak to my old super, but unfortunately he died. So now I'm left in the situation of going back to work, and it's as if nothing had happened as far as the job's concerned. Not for me, because not only have I been reduced in rank, which is a huge embarrassment and a disgrace, but all those people that you there's that old adage, isn't it? Be nice to the people that you pass on the way up, because you might meet them on the way down. Well, thankfully, I think I always was, but I was meeting people on the way down again, because I'd been reduced in rank, and I was having then to sort of fight my corner and re-establish my position in the job. And as I say, there was very much an element of, well, that's all sorted then. Just move on, pull yourself together, get on with it. So there was no support as such. And that is perhaps best exemplified. I was called in to see the superintendent in charge of HR, and I went in with my Federation friend by my side. And he said, Peter, you don't need your Federation friend now. And this guy was a friend of mine. I said, Dave, I can't get past the front door. I'm not allowed past the front door because you've still got my warrant card. I can't even get into this building. I've been through the mill. I've been dealt with, but I'm still treated as a complete outsider. That's why I've got my Federation friend with me, because he's the person who's got me through the front door to see you. And, they just didn't even think about anything like that. So then came the business of rebuilding the career. And it's funny how many of your friends, your former allies, no longer want anything to do with you when you're tainted in any sort of way. So it was very much a case of doing it on my own. I had one or two allies left who helped out, but it's again, it's a very strange relationship that a police force has with anything about corruption. You may have seen Cressida Dick, the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, on the news the other night, and her words exactly represent the sort of fervour and zealotry with which the police will pursue a whiff of corruption. That should come as a huge reassurance, I think, to the public. But, you know, it's almost as if they'll drop everything and they will bring all of the resources to bear if there is a whiff of corruption. And that's what's happened with me. But having then been tainted with it, it's very, very difficult then to rebuild and reestablish your credibility. But that is what I did. And so I sort of took my medicine, which was a bitter pill to swallow, I have to say, and rebuilt. I was never entertained to go back into the CID. For some reason, they thought that was, even though that was my history, they thought that was not the thing to do. So I got a succession of really difficult postings when I returned, both when I eventually recovered my rank and subsequently. So I became head of custody, which was a really considered to be a difficult posting. I managed to secure a secondment to the Department of Constitutional Affairs for a little while, which meant a promotion back to superintendent. And then I came back into the force as the superintendent in charge of management development and training, which was again a really difficult job. That was a very tricky 2 years. And then I was then approaching the end of my service. 30 years. You get to know in the police that there's something that happens, but you get to know when you're no longer flavour of the month. And I'd already been through that experience in spades, really, with the suspension. But you get to know, there's younger people coming through who are being pushed, who are being asked. They were now the people that I was just before I got suspended. So I finished my career looking after the policing of party conferences. So the Liberal Democrat Party conference in 2010. And the Labour Party conference later that year. Of course, the Liberal Democrat Party conference was by then a party of government because they were in coalition with the Conservatives. So, where we were in Merseyside, we'd never done that before. So that was a whole new thing. And that was really interesting. But that's the role I finished my career on. And, never say never. I look back on it now and I think about how I coped with it. And there are some sort of key elements to that, one of which is the unequivocal support of my family and the importance of having your family around you. And also one or two allies in the force. So my immediate boss, who was an amazing fella. He really was an amazing fella. He was hugely respected as a very old school, very practical, very wise bloke. And he made himself available to me basically all the time. Now, he was going to be a very, very busy fella, but he made himself available to me. He was a sounding board. He never questioned me, never really said anything about the process of the investigation. He was just there as a listener and as a supporter. And all the stuff that I was trying to do to divert myself from, the difficulties I was in, he would support. So things like going on a holiday, for instance, which was a difficult thing to plan because I had to seek permission. So he said, "No, seek your permission from me, and I'll grant it. Don't bother going to the inquiry. Seek it through me." And all of that sort of stuff took a lot of pressure off. And I'm ever thankful for him. But he was one of probably only 4 or 5 people who stuck with me. throughout that from the police side of things.
So, Peter, I've been listening deeply because it's just such an incredible story. I can't imagine that many people have gone through an experience like that.
No, I don't think many people do, even in the police. You know, it's not the sort of thing that happens every day. And suspension, I mean, particularly now, I mean, at the end of this, there were a lot of questions to ask of the inquiry and the investigation and the methods that they used. And the then chief constable, who was new to Merseyside, it was Norman Besson. He asked some very, very pointed questions of the investigative team. And I think since then, suspension as a tool has reduced. The use of it has reduced significantly. So not many people get it, even in my job. But I mean, it happened to a very close friend of mine who's a doctor about 2 years ago, and she felt exactly the same way. You know, the alienation, particularly from a job that you've sacrificed so much for, you know, and all of a sudden to realize that it counts for nothing. You know, so all the, you know, the missed birthdays, the cold dinners, the 2 hours sleep before going back to court in the morning, all the sitting in dodgy, frozen observation points or on top of Liverpool Cathedral, freezing your toes off, keeping observations on, counts for nothing. Absolutely nothing. And I, you know, at the point that I was suspended, I was quite a rarity because I had never had a complaint made against me. Not even a complaint, you know, of incivility or anything, or, you know, someone getting a ticket that they thought they didn't deserve. Never had I had anything like that. So this really was from hero to zero in one fell swoop, and it was painful.
And I can't imagine feeling like that for 2.5 hours, 2.5 days, 2.5 weeks, but 2.5 years to be going through that. I mean, I just don't even know how you managed to come back to an organization that had, as you said, you know, you had to fight them. You'd had to prove your worth. And this is, you said you went into the police force because you had a sense of responsibility and duty and justice. You know, there's strong justice, and yet to then be on the receiving end of such a huge injustice.
Yeah.
How does that work?
Well, it doesn't. I mean but that is exactly the nub. You know, it's the sense of betrayal and disloyalty is it's unbelievable. It's indescribable. As I say, you know, when you're in an organisation like the police, you know, you feel that you're all in it together. You're all fighting evil. It's the good guys against the bad guys. You know, it's playground stuff in a way, in a simple sort of way in your head, and then it all gets turned against you, and you think, whoa, I'm not the bad guy here. Why are you doing this to me? And, you know, that then gets compounded, as I say, with the way the investigation was handled, the fact that, you know, some of your best friends are being turned against you. You know, I even had it. I'd be walking down the street in the town near where I live, and I'd see someone who knew me from the job, and they'd cross the road to avoid me. You know, it's like you're running down the road with a bell shouting, unclean, unclean. It's horrendous. And that just was not me. I was, you know, as I say, I was flying. I was destined to be. If this hadn't happened, I am quite sure I would have been at least an assistant chief constable, because I was, and I don't say that out of any sort of arrogance, but I was on track, and I had the allies, I had the right sort of support. That would have happened. And this event, you know, although it was 2.5 years suspended, I've worked it out that it's probably knocked a 10-year hole in my career overall. And it probably, I think it probably affected the way that I worked when I went back to work. Before the suspension, before this investigation, essentially, I would have done anything for the job. You know, as I say, 24-hour shifts, no sleep, anniversaries, birthdays, whatever it is. Well, sorry, you come second. This is the job, and the job is everything. It's all encompassing. But after that, I was a lot more circumspect because I knew that none of that counted for anything. When the chips are down, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how good you were, how dedicated you were, how honest you were, even really. It counts for nothing in the whole scheme of things. And that was a rude awakening to me. But that's not to say that I didn't throw myself back into the job, because it was still the job that I loved, you know, and I took great satisfaction and great pleasure in going back and doing the right job, you know, and sort of living up to those, I suppose, vocational expectations that I entered the job with.
We all have this strong sense of justice. Well, I do, and I know you do for sure. And we're all now line of duty experts, anti-corruption experts, because we watched the show. And I know you mentioned earlier about the real line of duty. And I just wanted to ask you about going back into an environment, re-embracing that environment that had thrown you out as an outcast. And you survived, and you went back and you did, as you said, knocked a 10-year hole into your career. But where did the forgiveness come from? Was it linked to your why?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think having thought about it, my why and the police transcends the investigation and the extent of the investigation. You know, a lot of the investigation, I think, came down to personalities, the people that were involved, their own careers in pursuing the investigation. And, you know, hand on heart, I know these things happen, you know, and I've been there, you know, I've been the person who's had that whiff of corruption and thought, I'm going to be on that. I'm going to be right on that. I'm going to make sure that's sorted out straight away. So I understand why that sort of thing happens. And so that makes it, in a way, irrelevant to my wider why of why I was a police officer, you know, the vocation. There was still the job to do, you know, vulnerable people still needed protecting, bad guys still needed chasing. So it didn't really matter the fact that I had been through the mill and I had a good kicking along the way. It doesn't change the fact that people still need my attention. They still need my support. I still have a job to do. And it's interesting you talk about forgiveness. There are some individuals I will probably never forgive. I can live with them, you know, I can be civil to them, but I will never forgive them. But it's not the job that I'm forgiving. It's the individuals. And it's tricky when you first go back, because that distinction is still quite blurred. But with the passage of time, the distinction between that investigation, that time, that 2.5 years, the distinction becomes a lot clearer between, you know, the wider job that I was doing and the wider me, if you like, you know, my life, my overall career, where that 30-year police career sits in the life of Peter Edge. So, yeah, it wasn't easy to start off with, but it got easier with time, put it that way.
So having spent all those years standing up for the little guy, you now do stand-up comedy. How does that work?
It's a strange transition, isn't it, really? Yeah. 3 policemen go into a bar. No, it was... I've always been a comic. I've always been, you know, right from when I was at school, you know, I mimicked the teachers, I mimicked the other kids, I'd tell jokes, you know, in English classes, I can remember people saying, oh, let Peter Edge read his story, because I used to write funny stories. I've always had funny bones, you know. And that's been a huge bonus and a huge benefit to me in policing. You know, the number of times I've been able to diffuse situations through humour, to get people to engage with me because of humour. And And so throughout my police career, I was, and still am, an after-dinner speaker. So I speak about the lighter side of police in the inner city. And there are some amazingly funny stories of doing this job. There are even funny stories I can take out of that period, that 2.5 years. Not many, I'll give you that. But there are funny stories. And so I've told those stories for years and years and years. And then a couple of years ago, when I first started, if you like, more professional speaking, somebody said, "Oh, you should do a stand-up comedy course. Hone your skills." And I thought, well, I'm doing nothing else. I'll do that. And it was I think 6 weeks, a couple of hours a week. So I did it, and it culminated in a stand-up comedy performance for friends and family. And I went down like a house on fire. And then you just get the bug, and you then get on the circuit, the open mic circuit, and in whatever it was, in about 18 months, I'd done about 150 stand-up comedy gigs all over the country. And it's great because, making people laugh is one of the best therapies ever. It's a great feeling. I mean, you must have had it yourself. You deliver that killer line or a punchline to a joke, and the audience is rolling about laughing. And it's a great feeling, isn't it? It really is. It's a lovely feeling. But I'm afraid the last 12, 18 months hasn't been a good time for stand-up. It doesn't work half as well on Zoom, I have to say. I've done a few gigs on Zoom, but it's not the same. So I'm desperate to get back on a stage in front of a live audience in a nice, dingy, dark, seedy comedy club and bang out some jokes.
Well, it sounds great. And I've been on the receiving end of your jokes. We've had a few online opportunities there within the Professional Speaking Association. And yes, I can agree that you are very funny. So thank you for keeping us in good spirits over this last year and a half. It's been fantastic. Peter, you mentioned about storytelling, that you've always been able to tell great stories. What is it about that? What is it about the passing down of stories that is important to you?
Well, it's funny you should say that, because I've always been intrigued by storytelling. And then when I was lucky enough, as I say, when I was in my stellar phase of my career, when I actually had a career, I won a scholarship to go to university. And so for 3 years, I went and studied full-time at Liverpool University, and I did psychology and communication studies. And one of the things about the communication studies was about the importance of myth and storytelling as a medium of cultural reference and transport, really. And that has always intrigued me. And it's informed very much one of the things that I speak about now, which is lost knowledge. And just to explain what I mean by lost knowledge, it's all, I suppose, it's the magic that people have inside them, the knowledge that people have, not just the sort of explicit knowledge, the instructions, the how to do something, the kings and queens of England, all that sort of knowledge. It's the tacit knowledge that disappears when people move on, when they change jobs, when, God forbid, they keel over or get hit by a bus. I think that knowledge deserves to be captured. It deserves to be captured and used. And so that's what I talk about now. And I think about, civilizations thousands of years old that have, through the use of myth and fireside chat and storytelling around campfires or whatever, have managed to convey to subsequent generations a way of life, skills, abilities that have seen these civilizations or these cultures survive, sometimes in some of the harshest environments on our planet. You think of people like the Aboriginals in Australia, Kalahari Bushmen, some of the South African Indian people. And, they are in extreme conditions. Nobody's given them an iPad to write something down or wiki something or Google something. They pass on their knowledge to the next generation through example, through fireside chat, whatever it might be, through storytelling. And I think it's a wonderful thing. And I sincerely believe that we should be doing more of that now in this very fast-paced, high-tech 21st century that we live in. For everyone's betterment, really, but really because that knowledge is so valuable. It's such a valuable resource. And we do nothing with it sometimes. Or too many organizations, businesses, people don't do anything with it. They just let it slip away. And that's a sin, because I hate waste.
Well, I feel that you today have shared a story of justice, a story of resilience, a story of, as you said, unequivocal support from those around you. And there's a lot of learning to come from that. And again, I feel that is not lost knowledge. That's going to be passed down, and an opportunity to use as almost a metaphor to what many people have gone through over the last year, of where there has been a sense of injustice, a sense of not having the opportunities that you can prove yourself, to prove your worth, your innocence, your ability. But that fight that you had was in you because it was so strong. And it was such a personal why for you to pull through, because it means so much to you. So, yeah, thank you so much for sharing your story on the show today. I'd say it's been emotional, and it just does go to say how difficult it is sometimes to prove. And you said, what do they think I am? And it is difficult sometimes to show people who you are and show people who you truly are, because they can't see inside. They have to take it from what they can see, and often that can go against you. So, wow, it's been really difficult to hear your story and to see how a rising star was allowed to fall or did fall from grace, but without any proof at all.
Yeah. And, as I said at the beginning, the motivation, I believe, was not because it was me. It was because I was a route to somebody else. And there's two ways of looking at that. I think I was a hostage in a way, in that they thought I had the information that would help them prosecute my best mate. But they also felt that I might have the information that I might exonerate him. And so I might, in the fullness of time, be called to his defense. And so by treating me as a suspect, that diluted my credibility as a defense witness for him. And again, that's quite sinister. And it's quite sinister when you're dealing with someone's mind in the way, and when it's one of your own, and you're quite prepared as an organization or an investigative team to do that to one of your own. I find that very, very difficult to accept.
And whatever happened to your best man, Tony?
He was eventually, he went to trial. They took him to trial twice, didn't convict him. He was a wide load. I don't. That's an expression that we use in the police. He was a wide load. He wasn't good on admin. He was a bit of a fly-by-night. He would use methods which I wouldn't, but he got the job done. And in all of those many, many hours and thousands of pages of evidence that I was served as disclosure, there was not one piece of evidence which was compelling to me that proved his guilt. There was a lot of circumstantial stuff, particularly about conversations that he'd had with informants, or chizzers as they're known on line of duty. But those are the sort of conversations you have with those sort of people. So he left the organisation. He was sacked, but he'd actually left before he was sacked because he could. He was old enough to do that, and he's had a successful life elsewhere in a trade that he used to operate before he was a bobby. And good on him. He's I don't have anything to do with him anymore. I haven't seen him for 10 years or so. But they never proved to me, beyond reasonable doubt, that he was guilty, that he was corrupt. I think in the very end, they managed to convict him of an offence of aiding and abetting an attempt to commit council tax fraud. And that was about a girlfriend of his who was making a claim. So nothing to do with all of this alleged high-level corruption with drug dealers and the like that he was originally accused of.
So moving on to your seedy comedy clubs and your after dinner speeches and your absolute mission to retrieve lost knowledge and hope that it continues to be passed to generations. Bwhat's next on the agenda for you, Peter?
Well, who's to say? There's a number of things I'm doing at the minute. I'm one of those. I'm a bit like a dog chasing squirrels. I just see something like, oh, squirrel. I'm going to have a go at that. So I'm in the process of writing a book, even though it's slowed down a little bit at the moment. And that's a book about, it's a lifestyle book for youngsters destined for university. And it's going to be called something like The Survival Guide for Students. And I know you know about it. But it's things like, how do you shop? How do you budget? How do you make the most of your leftovers? So kids going to university who've never had a domestic science or a home economics lesson, as they used to call them, and have got really no idea how to boil an egg. Just a handy little reference book that gives us some tips on how to do some of the basic things. There'll be a couple of recipes in there, but it's not a cookbook. It's more of a lifestyle book, a common sense guide. So there's that. I'm hoping that if international travel ever opens up the sort of freedom that I'd previously enjoyed, I will go and walk another Camino. I've walked, as you know, three Camino de Santiago's by 3 different routes. The last 2 of which featured in my Camino podcast, because I'd made some sound recordings along the way, and I'd love to do that again and do a different route again, and probably make more recordings and make them into a walking podcast like that. The lost knowledge talk and that sort of direction, I'm still putting out there and trying to get some traction on, still trying to get some interest. But again, it's one of those really frustrating subjects that people, I don't think, really appreciate how important it is until they've suffered the effects of it. So it's very much it's a preventative talk in a way, and so trying to tell people what the benefits of it are is difficult. It's difficult to convince them, but I'm still working on that. I'm putting a lot of stuff out on LinkedIn about that, just in little short videos to explain some of the key points. Comedy, I can't wait for the comedy clubs to properly open up again, and so I can get on with that. And the sort of the golden thread that runs through it all is the after dinner speaking and emceeing compare work. I've just got my first post lockdown confirmed after dinner gig, but that's for April 2022. I'm hoping that there are going to be a few more coming to the diary between now and then. But life's good. I'm very, very fortunate. I've got 3 beautiful daughters, 2 absolutely gorgeous grandsons. They take a lot of my time. I've got a couple of motorbikes, a couple of push bikes. What more could you want in life, And
don't forget to mention the wife there, Peter.
Well, there is that. Yes. Yeah. I did mention it before.
You did. So, Peter, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Thank you so much for sharing why you do what you do. And do you have a way that people can get hold of you, Peter?
Yeah, well, I've got a website which is just in the process of being redeveloped, which is it's just peteredge.net. So www.peteredge.net, or you could just Google Peter Edge Speaking. I'm on LinkedIn. So just search for Peter Edge. I think there's a couple of us on LinkedIn, but I'm the one with the bow tie and the badge. You can email me at peteredge@sky.com, and by all means listen to the Camino podcast. So there's 2 on there, one from the Camino Primitivo and one from the Camino Portugues, and they're only usually about 10 or 15 minutes. So it's just a couple of minutes of me rambling on about what I'm doing in Spain, sometimes under the influence of excellent Spanish red wine, and sometimes not. Sometimes completely sober and blowing for tugs as I'm walking up a hill in Spain somewhere.
They're great fun. I really enjoy listening to them. I described it as an all-round experience, because you do have all of that wonderful sound. You've got the crashing of the waves, or the lorries that are rattling past you, and it's fantastic. It really is an experience. So, and I love the play on words for a podcast. It's brilliant. So well done on that.
Yeah, the PC podcast. Yeah. Oh well.
It's brilliant. Peter, thank you so much for coming on the show. Do you have some final words for the audience, please?
Well, I suppose that the one thing I'd say, that there was something that was said to me by a colleague of mine in my darkest moments in that very, very dark 2.5 years. And he's a real wag, this guy. But it actually does sum up a little bit of it, because he came in and he said to me, you know what? Today's news, tomorrow's chip papers. And yeah, it sounds flippant, but actually I took quite a lot of solace in that, because strangely enough, no matter what you suffer, no matter what happens, people will only remember it for so long. And it's past. Everything is history. Every time, every photograph is history. It's in the past. The future is what's important. And even if you've been right down, like me, lying on the floor, curled up, overwhelmed, there's light at the end of the tunnel. You've just got to find it. You've just got to push towards it and keep pushing towards it.
Thank you for listening to the Focus on Why podcast. I'm Amy Rowlandson, and if you've enjoyed this episode, please leave me a 5-star Apple Podcast review. Connect with me on LinkedIn, Instagram and Facebook, and become a member of my inspiring, uplifting and positive Focus on Why Facebook group. I help people to focus on their why with clarity, uniting their passion with their purpose with a plan, to create the life they truly desire. If you would like me to help you focus on your why, then please book a free 20-minute coaching call via calendly.com/Amy Rowlandson. And if you haven't already, please sign up for the Friday Focus weekly newsletter via my website, amyrowlandson.com. Have a purpose, have a plan, focus on why.